and welcome to the Motorsport Chat. I'm Natalie.
And I'm Tiara.
Unfortunately, it's that time of year for motorsport fans where the racing stops for the winter break. But luckily, we've had a fantastic season to look back on.
Nonetheless, it's been a season to remember for sure. We've seen chaotic collisions and some questionable penalties.
And records broken, mostly by Max Verstappen's Red Bull.
Also this week, we've had the post-season testing for F1, with Esteban Ocon finishing the test with the fastest time, followed by Pato O'Ward, then Frederick Vesti.
F2 testing also took place in Abu Dhabi, with Oliver Behrman topping the timesheets, Andrea Kimi Antonelli, and then Victor Martins. Here's our director, Cameron Gordon, with his thoughts on the racing we've seen this year.
Yes, hello, thank you, Natalie. Yes, I'm the director of the Motorsport Chat, but I love my Formula One as well, so I thought I'd get involved here in front of the camera for once and give you all a bit of a rundown, my notebook, as it were, on this season's performances from the different teams. We're going to start with Haas, because we're going to go in reverse championship order. We're going to end with the champions, Red Bull Racing. But first, let's talk about Haas. They scored 12 points this year, but they did unfortunately finish last in the championship. And that's mostly just down to the overheating tyres that the team has struggled with all season. New driver, Nico Hülkenberg, of course, back from a hiatus of 3 years, scored 9 points this season despite a lot of very good qualifying performances. And that's just because the tyres would get cooked at the end of the first stint. They'd fall back, they'd get back on new tyres, they'd be fairly quick, but by that point the damage was done and they'd end up chewing their tyres up by the end of the second stint anyways. It's something that's been a consistent problem for Haas for at least the last 3 years, and if they're going to improve, they're going to need to find a solution to that. This is 2 regulation formats where that's been the exact same problem each time. Another problem is Kevin Magnussen. He only scored 3 points this season, and that was from a 6th place in the Austrian sprint. He didn't score points at any other race. Again, he's suffering as much as Nico is with the overheating tyres, but they've really got to find a solution to that one, and they need to get more out of Magnussen. Of course, they chose him over Mick Schumacher last season to partner Nico Hülkenberg, and there'll be questions over whether that was the right choice. Moving on now to the first of the 2 Alfa teams, Alfa Romeo Sauber. Next year they will be Sauber Racing before their sponsorship deal with Audi starts in 2026. So they scored 16 points, thanks in big part to Bottas. Valtteri Bottas scored 10 points, while Zhou Guanyu scored 6. And this is his 2nd season in Formula One, so he's still not fully up to speed, quite like Valtteri Bottas, but they'll be hoping for more, especially because their Sauber junior driver, Theo Pourchaire, won his Formula 2 title. This was his 3rd time of asking, which might seem like a lot, but he's only 20 years old. He's a very impressive driver. I've been tracking him since he joined Formula 3, actually, and he really is quite quick on his day. And Zhou Guanyu he's got to be feeling that pressure for 2025. Of course, he's locked in for 2024. He's not got anywhere to worry just yet, but he'll be one he'll be definitely keeping an eye on, because Theo Pourchaire, for those of you that don't know, as Formula 2 champion, cannot race in Formula 2 next year. Now, there might be a seat available for him somewhere in endurance or in one of the other series, a GT category maybe, but he won't be racing in open wheelers next year unless he goes to Japan for Super Formula. Now we move on to the 2nd Alfa team, AlphaTauri. They scored 25 points, 17 of which came from Yuki Tsunoda, who I think had a quietly very, very good season. He's not always focused on. No one in AlphaTauri really is. They're often in the lower regions of the points, but he picked up a lot of 9th places. He was very consistently earning those bottom number of points, which for a team fighting for that 7th, 8th place in the championship, and of course they did finish 8th, although they were in the hunt for 7th, and we'll get on to that when I cover Williams. It's really important to pick up those 9th places where you can, and he was really good at that. He also had a couple of standout races. In my opinion, most notably Abu Dhabi. He always goes well there. He finished 4th there in 2021. He's really, really quick at Abu Dhabi, and he was quick again this weekend. Just missed out to Fernando Alonso right at the end, which was in part down to the one stop. His tyres were going off a bit, but also that Aston Martin is just quicker, and I think he held off so many cars for so long that he could be really impressed with his own performance. I certainly was impressed, and I hope he's got a long career. He's a Honda-associated driver, so we're coming up on the point where eventually perhaps AlphaTauri and Red Bull won't be needing his services anymore, but with Honda going to Aston Martin, maybe somewhere in 2026, he could find himself landing in that Aston Martin, which I think would be fantastic for him. He's been really good. But of course, that's not really what we want to talk about when it comes to AlphaTauri's season. You've got to talk about the fact that they used 4 drivers this year. Now, part of that was bad luck, but it was basically Yuki Tsunoda versus 3 other drivers. The 3 other drivers scored 8 points between them. That was 2 for Liam Lawson and 6 for Daniel Ricciardo. Nick de Vries scored none. And Nick de Vries, an anonymous first half of the season, really. He did really well in Monza last year. I think that's fair to say, though. I think the circumstances of that track did flatter him a little bit. That Williams was always quick in a straight line. And perhaps they jumped the gun a little bit in bringing him in. He just wasn't very quick. He really struggled to adapt to the car, I think, adapt to Formula One. Good in Formula E, but perhaps just not quite got the same driving style for Formula One. And they are different driving styles. Antonio Giovinazzi really struggled in Formula E, despite being pretty good in Formula One. So it just didn't happen for him. Obviously, he got replaced in mid-season with Daniel Ricciardo, who promptly injured himself at his 3rd race back, and they were kind of forced into using Liam Lawson, who was luckily on a break from Super Formula over in Japan, where he finished 2nd, by the way, a really impressive performance for him. I wouldn't be surprised to see him in Super Formula again next season, probably in the waiting list to see what happens with the big Red Bull driver shuffle, which I expect we will be seeing next year. He did really well. He really made a good impression of himself. The standout for me, definitely the Netherlands, where he scored the points. He was quick, he was controlled. You felt like he was really giving it his all in a good way. Moving on then to Williams, and they ended up 3 points ahead of AlphaTauri. So when Fernando Alonso overtook Yuki Tsunoda, he unfortunately took away that 7th place from AlphaTauri. Williams, I think they had a really quite good season, certainly Alex Albon. And I'm not the first one to heap praise on Alex Albon. He's really, really, really good. It was pushed into that Red Bull seat a bit early back in 2020 and 2019. He was still young, still new, still raw. It was too much for him, but now he's proving himself. If he's maybe not a future world champion, though, I wouldn't want to go that far. I think he is really talented. He's certainly one of the best midfield drivers in Formula One at the moment, and really, really impressive. And that shows by the fact that of those 28 points, he scored 27 of them. His teammate Logan Sargent scored just the 1, avoiding that dreaded 0, and meaning he did outscore Nick de Vries, at the very least, in the standings. Luckily for him, he scored that 1 point in the Circuit of the Americas. So he scored at one of his 3 home races. That's nice for him. It's something to hold on to, at least. That said, he will be aware, and despite his comments in the press that he's feeling pretty confident, he will be aware that, unlike every other driver on the grid, he isn't actually confirmed for 2024. I think at this point, unless Sauber offer a decent chunk of money to Williams, he's sticking around. But don't be shocked if Theo Pourchaire suddenly comes out of nowhere and ends up taking the seat. Again, he's got nowhere else to go, and Sauber don't have the connections that the big teams have with other series. So maybe they'll try it, see what they want to do. Though, yeah, you know, if Sauber are paying attention to this, I wouldn't recommend it. Theo Pourchaire is very good, and you don't want to be strengthening your rivals like that. Logan Sargent, though, it was an okay rookie season. It's a hard car. It's a hard formula at the moment, and I think he could have done more, but I wouldn't be too disappointed if I were him. He just needs to avoid crashing. Quite a few crashes towards the end of the season as he just kept pushing, and he just needs to find his pace a little bit. Moving swiftly on to 6th place now, an Alpine. Now, you're probably not going to expect this when I say they scored 120 points with 2 podiums. So there's a surprise for you. Esteban Ocon scored 1, Pierre Gasly scored 1, in what is honestly the theme of Alpine's season. They weren't racing anyone this year, but they were racing each other, the closest match teammates on the grid, by far. In the end, Gasly slightly outscored Ocon. He scored 4 more points than his teammate, but there was nothing between them in a lot of races, and that meant that it was a very fierce inter-team rivalry. No doubt, we're all going to remember Gasly's very angry messages on the radio as he was told to let Ocon by in Japan. Ocon has this issue with his teammates, and it'll be interesting to see if this develops further. He's always struggled to get along with his teammates, and I think that's because he always runs them so close. He ran Gasly really close. And 1 podium each is nice. That said, if you're Alpine, you have to be disappointed. Last season, they finished 4th, and this season, they're 6th. They scored more than 50 points less than last year as well. They've just gone backwards. I think it's more that other teams have gone forwards, but in Formula One, everyone's moving forwards, and you've got to be the team moving forwards. And Alpine they just seemed a bit stagnant this year, and it's left them fighting all by themselves. And if they're not careful, that could be the case for all of 2024, and they don't want that for sure. Moving on to 5th place, and this is a team which probably is quite happy with 5th if we'd asked them at the start of the season, but given how the season went, they've got to be disappointed, and that's Aston Martin. They scored 280 points. Fernando Alonso, the big scorer here, he scored 206 points, while Lance Stroll scored 74. And Fernando Alonso had a tremendous season. Despite his age, he really is proving that he is just one of the best drivers in Formula One still. He had a really confident season, lots of great performances, loads of podiums. And I feel like all of us watching at the start of the season would have said he was probably the guy that was going to win a race if it was going to be a non-Red Bull driver. But then it went wrong. It went wrong as they brought upgrades. In Formula One, it's often that we hear about people being outdeveloped, but it's very rare that you hear about a team basically outdeveloping themselves. Every single upgrade Aston Martin brought just seemed to make the car worse. And sure enough, when they eventually gave up on it and went back to an earlier version of the car, they got quicker again. And so their season ended on a reasonable high. They certainly found their pace again, but there's got to be questions asked about what that in-season development means. If they had been a little bit quicker at the start of the season, there'd be real questions over whether they might actually have been genuine competitors to Red Bull in the way Ferrari were last year. But if they'd developed like that, they'd have fallen off very quickly. And if they want to fight for championships, which they do, they've invested loads of money, they've got all these new facilities, they've brought on huge sponsors like Aramco and Cognizant, and they've hired massive names like Dan Fallows. If you're bringing those people in, you're doing that to win championships, and you are not going to win a championship if every time you bring an upgrade, the car gets slower. So that's going to be one that they really have to focus on for the future. Maybe they could take a leaf out of McLaren's book. McLaren were 4th in the standings at the end of this, and it was close between them and Aston Martin right up to the wire. In the end, McLaren scored 302 points and Aston scored 280, so that's just over 20 points between them. It's not very much in constructors' terms. This is mostly down to Lando Norris, it must be said. He got all the upgrades first, and I'm going to caveat with that first. He scored 205 points, his best ever points haul. First McLaren driver to get over 200 points in quite some time. And Oscar Piastri scored 97. Lando Norris might be my driver of the season outside of Max Verstappen, which we'll get to, but he has to be a driver of the season. He was consistently fantastic once the car got better. But even before that, when the car was really poor, and it was really poor, they started the season with Lando in 17th place and Piastri retiring. He still picked up a couple of points, a 9th place here, an 8th place there. He was getting the points when it mattered early on. And then, come Austria, everything changed. From that point on, he went on a ridiculous run. He scored more points than almost anyone else in that period. And he ended up with 7 second places. Sergio Perez only managed 6. So in the end, he outperformed Sergio Perez and every other driver in that second place. You got to ask, when is Lando Norris going to stop being the bridesmaid? And that feels true for McLaren too. In Singapore, they were probably the second fastest team, though Mercedes got the strategy right on that one, at least initially. So it looked, that flattered them. McLaren probably were closest to Ferrari though. And you'd really think the one weekend where Red Bull were falling apart, maybe McLaren would have managed it, but no, they were second even then. McLaren need to break out of this funk. They need to find a way to start winning races, but who'd have thought we'd be saying that after Bahrain? The turnaround for that team is just, it's really incredible. And of course, while technically Carlos Sainz is the only man not in a Red Bull to win a race, you've got to give a shout out to Oscar Piastri, who did in fact win a race, a sprint race in Qatar. And that was a real highlight for him. Honestly, one of the best rookie performances I've seen in a very long time. In terms of modern Formula One, since the testing ban, Charles Leclerc is my best rookie. His rookie season was incredible. I think Piastri came close. He really did have a just incredible rookie season, and he's got to be happy with that, despite the points difference, a big part of which can be explained by the difference in car version. Especially in qualifying, they got a lot closer as things went on. Looking then at third place, Ferrari. They scored 406 points. Charles Leclerc ended up outscoring Sainz, managing 206 points to Sainz's 200. He turned it around very well, Charles Leclerc. He had a difficult start to the season, but I think the upgrades brought the car more towards him, more to his preference, more away from Carlos Sainz's, and he used that to great form. Front row 5 races in a row at the end. He really was quick. And, it felt like he was giving Max Verstappen at least a bit of a run for his money at points, even if realistically there was never anyone else that was going to win a race. He could be really proud of that. I think he'd have been even more clear in the fourth place race. But for that DSQ in Circuit of the Americas, which he's not the only one to lose out on that one. Lewis Hamilton did too, of course. And if not for the DNS in Brazil, which was really unlucky, just a part braking on the car, nothing you could do about that. You've got to ask, when is Charles Leclerc going to start getting some luck? Because he's been driving fantastically. And you just got to hope that it comes back to him soon, especially after 2022, where at the start of the season, he was really impressive to me. Sainz, I have got to shout out. Yes, he got outscored by his teammate, but very, very barely. It was really close between them. And Carlos Sainz is the only man to win a Grand Prix that isn't in a Red Bull, and that has to be mentioned. Red Bull were dominant, and there's so many things we could say about them. So somebody had to capitalise in Singapore, and Carlos Sainz did. One of the drives of the season for sure, and one we're going to be looking back on. So intelligent that in every race after Singapore, all the commentators were asking if a driver was going to try that, and that's because it was just a genius thing to do. He knew Lando Norris did not have the tyres anymore, so he just held him there, knew he could be quicker, had confidence in his abilities, and really turned it around in a big way to deliver a huge win for Ferrari. And means that this is the second time they've been spoilers to a perfect season. After 1988, the only other time a team came even close to a perfect season, and it was Ferrari then too, though that was in Monza. Moving to Mercedes. Just about second in the constructors, and really just about. Charles Leclerc did everything in his power to try and deliver that second place to Ferrari in Abu Dhabi. But it was Merc in the end. They outscored Ferrari by 3 points across the season. Lewis Hamilton first, third in the standings, 234 points. George Russell managed 175. And Lewis Hamilton had a really interesting season to me. He was third in the standings. He was fighting for second for a very, very long time. But if you actually look at his performances or his results, you wouldn't think that. You would think that he was just having a pretty consistent whatever season. Actually, it was really impressive. If I'm being honest, I'm not convinced that the Mercedes was ever the second fastest car. Not at a single race, even Singapore. I think it was closer to Singapore, but I think it was pretty much always third best. But they were really helped by the fact that the other cars around them, the Aston Martin, the Ferrari and the McLaren, were either second or like fifth best. They were never consistently a second best car, whereas Mercedes were consistently the third best car. And Lewis Hamilton used that to incredible effect. He picked up loads of podiums. He managed 6 podiums, a lot of them third places, but he was very consistently on the podium, picking up the points when he needed to be. George Russell, though, well, he called it his worst season of his racing career. I hesitate to say that's entirely fair, though he has had such high standards throughout his racing career. He just never quite got together with this car. It felt like it got better towards the end, but there was never a race where you felt like he was doing better than Hamilton. And I think eventually that got to him. He started making a few mistakes. The obvious mistake here is Singapore, where he ended up going in straight on and into the barriers, just pushing a bit too hard. But you know, it's a staple of a driver trying everything to overdrive a car that isn't quite giving it. I think he can be overall fairly happy. His points were vital. I mean, his third place was vital in the end to secure that second place. He can't be disappointed with that. But you can understand how he feels quite this disappointed. He only managed 2 podiums this season, I believe. And that's not really where he wanted to be, you know, especially after winning a race last season. And he'll be hoping for more from Mercedes next season. And now we move on to Red Bull. And what can you say about Red Bull? Let's start with just the pure numbers. They scored 860 points. Max Verstappen picked up 19 wins and 575 points along the way. And Sergio Perez managed 285 points. It's a huge gap. It's the most dominant team in history, the most dominant driver in history. There's no arguing that one, and every statistic says that. In the end, 1,003 laps were led by Max Verstappen. You just have to ask, what can anyone do to actually stop him? He was just unbeatable all season. Every time it looked like he was down, well, he was back. And by the end of the season, I was certainly watching just to see who'd finished second. There was no point trying to guess on the winner because it's always Max Verstappen. Perez, though, an up and down season for him, more down than up, I think. He crucially secured P2 in the Drivers' Championship. It's the first time Red Bull have ever managed a 1-2, owing a little bit to just the sheer dominance of that car, if we're honest. He started pretty brightly. I think at the start there was a genuine feeling that maybe he could actually compete somewhat with Max Verstappen, at least give him a push. And then it just all went wrong. After Europe, it just fell apart for him, and I'm not convinced he ever really found his pace again. Hopefully a reset will help him, but if not, do not be surprised if we see a big Red Bull driver shuffle. I think Daniel Ricciardo or indeed Yuki Tsunoda could be a real push for that seat. They need more from Perez. Yes, he secured second this season, but he only really secured second in part thanks to some luck, and he needs to be doing better than that, and they know that. Still, that's 2023 in a nutshell. Hopefully it'll be a more exciting season next season. We'll be hoping for a bit more of a 2022 season. I'll certainly be watching the whole way though, and I hope you will be too.
Thanks, Cam. Over the weekend, we had the final race of the season in Abu Dhabi at the Yas Marina circuit.
And this is where we saw Max Verstappen take his 19th win of the season.
I think it was almost historical point for F1.
Yeah, definitely.
Because this was such a record, like as we said, a record-breaking
season. Definitely. I think it's going to be one that F1 fans think about or refer to for a very long time. Like Max Verstappen said, I believe it was at the weekend, it's going to be so hard to replicate this season.
Statistically, especially, with the amount of records they have broken, Red Bull are dominated more than I think anyone could have ever predicted a team to dominate.
I think we all saw it coming, but just not in this type of way. They've absolutely taken over Formula One at the moment, and it's just at a point where other teams simply can't keep up, no matter how hard they try, which is a good thing for them, a bad thing for fans, because it means there's not as much competition, but you can't fault anything that they've done, apart from maybe in Singapore, but that's one race.
That was one race. Yeah. Possibly one of the better races of the season.
Yeah, definitely.
But before we head on to our thoughts for the season, we'll jump into our thoughts for Abu Dhabi. I think the race wasn't the most exciting we've seen all season in terms of the racing and overtakes and things like that. But I think it was interesting to see the fight for P2 in the constructors. Yes. Because at the end of the race, there was the battle with Leclerc trying to,
really good thinking skills though. He was, I think post-race he was saying that was something that he spoke through with the team, sort of came up with himself, and he was allowed to sort of try that strategy, and of course it didn't work. Yeah. In another race it may have worked, but it was really good sort of thinking on his feet, really good initiative from him as well.
Definitely. I think Perez did have quite an unlucky race, really. He managed to get, was it P4 in the end? Yeah. Because he got a 5-second penalty from a collision with Norris. I do think it was Norris's fault from watching the race. I thought, it was his fault. He should have left the racing line for Perez to get through. So I don't know. I don't fully agree with it. Personally. What are your thoughts?
I absolutely agree with you there. I think it's harsh because he's being punished for something that wasn't particularly his fault, in my opinion, of course. I think that race sort of epitomised this entire season. Not an awful lot of competition, some small moments of
bad luck for Perez.
Bad luck for Perez, which we've seen consistently throughout the season. So, of course, it wasn't the most exciting race, but it has come to an end, and I do quite like the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix as well. So
I think Piastri, the whole season he's performed well, and we've spoken about this multiple times because he's been someone that we've really looked at and focused on, because he's had great drives,
really good
drives, some interesting moves. This weekend he had a battle with Russell where he kept him behind. His defending is so entertaining, similar to Alonso's style.
Very similar. I think he's just done so well. And of course, we're not going to go on to the entire season yet, but I think he's done so well, and it's so good to watch him race. And I'm really excited for what he has in store for the future, because he's going to be fantastic. He's just getting started, so
definitely.
Really exciting.
So, like his teammate Norris, he also had a fairly okay race as well. I think the last few races he's not had the best of luck.
Yeah, definitely.
With the car in the situation, but I think that's more because Mercedes and Ferrari have had better pace and strategies, which have obviously put them higher in the places in the race as well. But also Leclerc has had a great weekend in Abu Dhabi. Unfortunately, at the start, he couldn't quite get first position and hold it, which was a bit devastating to see. But he did try and push Verstappen.
He really did. Yeah, he really did. I think it was good to see him at least try and not just fall back. It was good to see some kind of aggression, would you say?
Yeah, definitely.
It's good to see a bit of that, a bit of grit. So it was quite entertaining. Unfortunately, of course, didn't go to plan, but
he got
not a lot of things
P2,
go to plan,
which
so.
was great to see at least someone else on the podium. And then Russell as well had quite a strong weekend, really, something that he's not really. The past few races, he's not been a driver that we've seen. He's not really stood out for us.
He's just sort of been there. Is that it's just sort of been
definitely.
there,
Whereas his teammate Hamilton has not really been putting in the performances, I would say, but he's been having some interesting battles with some of the midfield drivers.
Yeah.
So particularly towards the end, I think it was the last lap actually, there was a battle with Hamilton and Tsunoda, and my goodness, Tsunoda.
It was just
so aggressive
Yeah.
with his movements, and I couldn't ask for any better racing really to watch as a fan.
And that's what we want, really. We want a bit of aggression, a little bit of fighting. It's what makes F1 fun, and it's why we watch it as well. So it was good to see a bit of that. But I will say, every time I've sort of seen something really notable from Hamilton, it's been when he's battling out on the track, and it's good to see other drivers getting involved as well. So yeah,
a bit like Cam said with Tsunoda, I think he's performed better than we would have expected. Of course, with his teammates, such an odd situation having to change teammates consistently throughout the season. I think that would affect you quite a lot as a driver because you've not
quite unsettled naturally.
You've not got the partner.
You've not got that familiarity, that consistency, and in Formula One, but also in all types of sports, in life, it's nice to have consistency and to have familiarity. So I think, considering the situation that they have there, he's done quite well, because I know I wouldn't be able to deal with that if I was a racer.
Yeah, I think the teammate situation can be quite a big part. Like we saw in this race where Piastri did slightly move to the side for Norris to get past, which is quite a big part of team strategy when they have to let the other driver past. So I think that will be something that might have affected him quite a lot. But it'll be interesting to see how he does next year.
Yeah. I'm really looking forward to seeing how well he does. I hope
definitely. So moving on to the season and our thoughts for the season. It's been an interesting season so far.
Interesting, to say the least.
To say the least.
It's been, I wouldn't even use the word thrilling, because this is sort of what we were expecting, but it's been nice to watch. Like we said at the beginning, one for the history books as well. A season that has honestly been like no other. I think Red Bull have absolutely dominated. I've not, in my lifetime at least, I've not seen a team have so much control. I think there's a statistic that says Verstappen's won 86.36% of the race this season, which is just insanity.
Yeah,
it's insane.
19 out of 22 races. I mean, who would have expected that a driver would do that in this day?
Definitely not me.
Definitely not me.
It's just speechless.
3 races he didn't win. 2 of them Perez, 1 Sainz. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's insane that he could have won so much. And they weren't even close wins. He won by a substantial amount.
Yeah.
Which is insane, really. But that RB19 has just completely taken away this season.
Done so well. Yeah. And of course, the cars are going to be tailored towards Max, of course. But I think it's also, I think sometimes people don't give him enough credit for the fact that he's able to just bring in results almost every time. of course, like I said, the car's probably tailored a little bit more towards him, but despite that, I think even if it wasn't, I think he'd still do remarkably well. So I've got to give him his credit. He's done really well.
I'm dying to know, where do you think Red Bull will place next year? With pace, or, I mean, I think they might still take it, but what are your thoughts?
I would say I think they might still take it. There might be maybe a bit more competition from other teams, but I feel confident in saying that I think Red Bull are going to be probably the same next year. There might be less of a gap between them and other teams. I think one big thing that I've definitely learnt this year is that, of course, there's not a lot of competition, but it's not all on Red Bull to create competition. Other teams really have to put in that work and really make sure that their cars are top notch, and not all of them were this year, unfortunately. So I think, to put it short, I think they'll still come out on top next year. What do you think?
I do think it'll be Red Bull. I think P2, it's interesting because this year we've had such an odd midfield. It's been so inconsistent with the positions, who could possibly take the podiums. I think towards the end of the season, it was more Ferrari than any other team, Mercedes, McLaren, for example. But I do think that next year, hopefully it'll be more stabilised, but more competitive.
Yeah.
Even if Red Bull do dominate again, which I think possibly we might see.
It'll just be nice to have a bit of competition.
Yeah.
Well, we did have a bit of competition this year and it wasn't enough. So it would just be nice to have something.
Yeah.
And to just...
someone to challenge Verstappen a little bit more.
Someone to challenge him. It's what the fans want.
Do you think that will mean that they need a different driver for Red Bull in the second seat?
I think they should have a new driver, a different driver. I really do. I think Perez, he started off the season well, faltered, and just hasn't been able to get himself back. He's really just not... what's the word? I just think they really do need a different driver.
Do you think Lawson's going to be the driver to take that seat for Red Bull?
That's a really good question. Potentially. It's quite tricky because I was reading about this the other day. With a lot of the drivers, a lot of them are out of contract by the end of 2024. So you could see a shock replacement come in for Perez. So it's tricky. It's hard for me to say. It would be nice. But I'm not sure if it'll happen.
Red Bull are known for shuffling their team around, which in some ways has played out badly for them. I think they didn't give De Vries enough of a chance, like half a season, was it? Not even that.
I think they're quite ruthless in that respect. If you're not performing, you're gone. And I think it's definitely an interesting way to do things. Yeah. Definitely an interesting way to do things. But I think as long as they have Max putting in the same performances, I don't think they really care.
Yeah, but I think it can work, as we've seen with Albon.
Yeah.
They took him out. He had a year out in 2020, I think it was.
Yeah.
Came back, and look at him now. He's doing so well at Williams.
Yeah.
In some respect, would you say that he's possibly a contender for that Red Bull seat? Maybe, now that he might be ready for the pressure?
I could see it, but also I feel like if I was in his position, I would be thinking to myself, I've done really well this season. I don't want to mess anything up. And just for the consistency and, like, again, the familiarity, might stay where he is for fear of wanting to repeat what happened at Red Bull.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's with Red Bull, they're really ruthless, and I do think that sometimes swapping out drivers works for them in the short term, but in the long run, sometimes it doesn't work. So it'll be really interesting to see who comes in for Perez.
Yeah.
It'll be nice to see them have a team we've got two fantastic drivers who really do put in the performances, but then with that comes competition as well.
Yeah.
And that'll be really interesting to see if it does happen as well. So
definitely.
Only time will tell.
Only time will tell. I want to go on to McLaren because Cameron did touch on this. The way they've come from behind this season, they started the season so badly at the back of the
really
grid.
Badly.
We've mentioned this before.
Norris leaving, so it was really bad.
It was atrocious. We thought Norris would possibly leave the team and go to Red Bull at one point. That was huge in the media.
Yeah.
But now it seems like the team are very settled. They've invested a lot within the team members, and throughout the team. I think it's just interesting. They got the fastest pit stop.
Yes.
With 1.8, which is insane.
Really, it's insane.
You
really,
would
really
think
good.
out of every team it would have been Red Bull, because we know they are the fastest for pit stops.
Yeah.
That was very, very
Outstanding.
good. Yeah.
I'm really excited for McLaren. I think obviously when the season started it was like, oh gosh, what's happening? But they've really turned it around. They've got two really good drivers. You've got Piastri, who's just been absolutely amazing. Any faults that he's making are ones that you'd expect from a rookie. Of course, tyre management and things like that. But you're going to have that when you first come into Formula One, because the races are much longer. So naturally you're going to struggle with that management. But everything that he's doing, all the mistakes that he's making are things that are natural. So I really can't wait to see him grow into it. It'll be so, so exciting. Of course, you've got Lando Norris, who's fantastic.
Yeah. Driver of the season.
Definitely. Definitely.
Well, Max Verstappen is possibly driver of the season.
Other than Max.
Then, yeah.
Yeah.
Then Norris.
But I'm really, really excited to see what McLaren have in store. If they just keep going on this path, I think they could really, really, really just do really well.
They've got a bright future ahead of them, definitely.
Absolutely. It'll be good to see them restore their status in Formula One.
Norris is a driver that's always kind of kept it quite cool within the car. Piastri is very good for this. Just keep him relaxed and calm, which is something you don't usually see rookies do. They do get quite frustrated when they don't automatically click with the car.
Yeah.
This is something we saw a lot with Max, obviously, when he first started out. He did get quite frustrated, making mistakes and things like that. Yuki was someone who's quite vocal on the radio, with getting frustrated. But it's interesting that Piastri is so calm.
Yeah.
Compared to all the other drivers.
It's different. It's calm, collected.
It's like he's
really,
made for it.
Yeah, it's just really, would you use the word mellow? Just really
mellow.
just really calm.
Yeah.
As calm as you can be.
Quite graceful for an F1 driver.
Yeah, quite graceful.
Yeah.
But it's just really, really excited to see what McLaren do next season. That'll be really, really fun.
So I want to know what your favourite race from the season has been.
Oh,
so far.
My favourite race?
Yeah.
Oh, I really enjoyed Singapore for the competition.
For the interesting podium as well, yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it from that perspective. I also quite enjoyed the Brazilian Grand Prix because Fernando Alonso absolutely shined, and it's just that was one of my highlights of the season. Just fantastic racing all round.
Oh yeah.
I would put either of those. What about you?
Well, the Brazilian that is that is my favourite race. So usually it is the top spot anyway. Yeah. So I'd probably say the Brazilian Grand Prix, because I'd say again, Alonso, one of the standout drivers for me when watching F1. You tend to notice him, his driving style, so recognisable.
Really good defensive driving as well. He's just amazing.
Yeah,
and this season, I think I wouldn't say he's carried Aston Martin. That would be unfair. But without him, they would not be.
They would not have got anywhere as close within points. I mean, what was he on? Like Cameron said, like 200 and...
Yeah.
It was a ridiculous amount that there was a gap between him and Stroll.
He's really contributed a lot to that team. I think he's had a great season, a really, really good season. I can only hope that he'd continue that into next season.
Definitely. So yeah, moving on, I think Canada was quite a good race.
Yeah.
Wet race, something that's quite interesting. It's kind of known for being
exciting.
a wet race anyway. But I think one of my favourite moments from the season was Russell thinking that it was raining, with it actually just being sweat in his helmet.
Yeah.
Just something Russell would do. Also, all the Russell memes have been great this year.
Yeah, they've been fantastic.
If anyone's not like following social media or anything like that, basically there's been memes of Russell just being that guy.
Yeah.
Like, I'm trying to think of an example. Go ahead. Yes. So also the starting images for F1, and he does the pose. Like it's the pose.
Tree pose.
He's just been one to watch on the media.
Like,
he is. He just does funny things, like funny poses, and looks at the camera and things.
Yeah, just really funny things.
Yeah.
Also, one thing I wouldn't say it's been the best moment of the season, but one thing I really enjoyed at Silverstone when Lando Norris, first lap, led the British Grand Prix.
Yes.
The noise from the crowd
ecstatic.
was amazing.
Yes.
It was fantastic, and it was just like,
I think people thought,
Get a rush.
oh my gosh, it's not Verstappen going into the it was
it was
exciting
just-
for once.
It was so good. So that's something that I think about when I think about this season. I think about my favourite moments. That comes up as well.
Yeah.
Definitely. And the crowd noise was just amazing. Amazing.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So, in terms of like the F1 season, it wasn't the best, but I think we have a lot to look forward to for next year.
Definitely.
Hopefully, it will be slightly different. We'll see some changes, possibly some different drivers. Do you think there'll be anyone we will see who's not on the grid right now joining any teams? Perhaps.
It's tricky. I'm probably being a bit naive when I say this. Honestly, I don't.
Okay.
I think it is just me being really naive because I'm a wishful thinker. I like stability. Williams still have that seat open.
Yes, Logan Sargent.
Yeah.
Do you think he's done enough to keep that seat within Williams?
I don't think so. I think they've spoken really positively about him coming back, but if they're so positive about it, why haven't they secured him down for next season?
He said himself that he's very sure that he's going to keep that seat at Williams, but
I wouldn't be so sure because
the fans are less convinced.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think that's the only thing that I would say is I could see someone else coming in for Williams. Like I said, if he's so positive about it, if the team was so positive about it, genuinely, they would have secured him for next season already. And the seat's still open, so there's obviously some doubts. What do you think?
Well, it's heading to the winter break. That's when we tend to see a lot of announcements coming out. This is the time of year when drivers are seat swaps do happen.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the grid are quite secure in terms of their positioning within teams.
I think it'll probably be next year where you'd see a bit more of a shuffle, I suppose. Of course, like you said, the winter break is, even though when you've got seats secured, you can still swap around. Like I said, I'm naive, so I like to think that everything's going to stay the same.
Yeah.
But I would expect next year to be a bit more chaotic in terms of seat swapping, because I've got it written down here. We have Russell, Hamilton, Piastri and Verstappen. They're the only ones, and Norris, who have contracts that extend past 2024. I believe it's Norris, Russell and Hamilton who have them expiring in 2025. So that's an awful lot of drivers who haven't really made that commitment yet.
Well, I think we can see the Ferrari drivers staying for longer.
That's sort of a given. Is that fair to say? I think
fairly, because we all know Ferrari like to make long contracts. I think Leclerc's last contract was about 5 years, something like that.
They really do like to commit.
Optimistic that they're going to do so well within that short amount of time. But it'll be interesting to see. Sponsors are also going to be quite interesting. This week it was announced that, was it McLaren partnering with Monster? Which shocked us, because I always associate Monster with Lewis Hamilton, Mercedes.
See it on the floor of the sea.
So for them to shift to McLaren, I thought it's quite interesting.
Bold choice.
Quite interesting move. So this year we've also seen different series. We've had Teo Porchet winning the F2, Gabriel Bortoleto winning F3. Zach O'Sullivan also had a good season in F3. British driver, I think we could see him doing quite well, moving up throughout the series. But we've also had Formula E, which is something that starts in January. So that's going to be interesting to see the season play out. Jake Dennis won the championship this year. He's done the post-season test. Do you think there's any place for him within Formula One, even as a reserve driver?
Potentially. At the very least, I would expect probably reserve driver. When you have people that, perform so well, I mean, it's hard to just leave him there. I think it would be a really good opportunity for him as well. What do you think?
I don't know. I think I could see him as a reserve driver for Red Bull, especially if Lawson does go to a different team. Even if he moves to endurance or anything like that, I think we can see possibly Jake Dennis securing a reserve driver seat. Be good to see.
It would be really nice. I would be, like I said, it would be, at the very least, it would be nice to see him as a reserve driver. And if it's at Red Bull, I mean, it's a really good place to be as well. So
hopefully gonna try and go to a Formula E race next year. We'll see though. Looking forward to World Rally Championship because there's going to be a race in Wales, which is exciting.
Yeah.
To have a race nearby-ish.
Well, you don't have to have an awful long of a journey either.
Yeah.
Not too long of a trip.
At least a drive, which is better than other races.
Just a drive.
Yeah, which should be quite interesting.
Yeah.
Is there any races you're looking at going into?
Honestly,
the issue is they're very expensive.
This is the thing,
especially the races within the UK, which means that you're more likely to go abroad, but then you have to pay for hospitality, like the
so
costs
they all come
of
out
everything.
to really similar costs.
Yeah.
The bottom line is they're all quite expensive. One place I'd really like to go to again. I loved Silverstone when I went. I absolutely loved it. But if I could go to any, I think. Oh, I don't know. Oh my gosh! Wait. I want to go to all of them.
Of course.
I just want to go to all of them. I think I'd love to go to Monaco.
Oh, okay.
If I could choose any race to go to, like next season, like if cost wasn't an issue, Monaco, because I just naturally love Monaco. Yeah. Not an awful lot of competition, but it's just I think in terms of atmosphere, the history that the track has. Be nice to go there, and I love a little bit of history myself.
Love it.
Yeah.
Heading into next year, can I just get your F1 top 3 drivers predictions?
Top 3. Well, 1, Max Verstappen.
Okay.
And that's my safe option. 2. Oh.
This is where it gets interesting.
Yeah.
P2, because I feel like there's a lot to play for. We don't know where the teams are going to play.
Because you could put, not anyone, but you could put a lot of people in that
category.
Yeah, in that category.
I have faith in Fernando Alonso.
I do. I feel a little bit like
if they invest more and develop that car, don't bring upgrades that downgrade the car.
Yeah,
I think they have the potential to get
for him to end up there. Yeah. And perhaps a bit of a wild card, perhaps Norris.
Right.
It's all conditional. If the car's good, if he continues on the path that he's going on, if he really pushes, I could see it happening. But the thing is, it's a struggle because there's so many good drivers.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to choose. Well, I'm going to say it's hard to choose 2 because Max will be in there somewhere. It's hard to choose just 2 when there are so many different things that depend on whether they end up being P2 and P3. Do you know what I mean?
Of course.
That make sense?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a really good question though. One thing I will say is I'm really, really excited for next season because there's so much to look forward to. Like you said, it'll be a really exciting season. I'm hoping more competitive.
Yeah.
So I am really looking forward to seeing where everything ends up, where all of our cards lie, essentially.
Well, hopefully I'll have more time to watch more racing next year, so we'll have more to chat about, different series, that kind of thing. But that's all we have time for today.
Thank you very much for watching.
Goodbye.
Bye.